On a quiet spring afternoon, as the city bustled with the usual chaos of life, a knock echoed on the heavy mahogany door of a towering corporate skyscraper. It was the headquarters of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. People usually came with business cards, briefcases, and well-rehearsed pitches. But on this day, it wasn't a businessperson standing at the CEO's office door, it was a 4-year-old child, clutching a crumpled stuffed animal and wearing shoes that were far too small for her growing feet. The CEO, Alexander Grant, known for his strict demeanor and unshakable focus on results, was in the middle of reviewing quarterly losses when his secretary hesitantly entered and whispered, "Sir, there's a child here. She asked for you." At first, he assumed it was some mistake. But when he walked out, there she was. Big brown eyes, messy curls, and an innocence that somehow managed to cut through the corporate air like sunlight through storm clouds. She looked up at him and said softly, "Can you be my friend?" The entire floor fell silent. Alexander, a man who hadn't smiled in months and barely spoke to his own team outside of meetings, knelt down instinctively. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophie," she replied. "My mommy says I shouldn't talk to strangers, but you don't feel like one." That single line pierced through Alexander's defenses. For reasons even he couldn't understand, he invited her into his office. The staff watched in stunned silence as the usually cold and composed CEO walked back with a tiny child holding his hand. Inside the glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, Sophie climbed onto the large leather couch. "It's so high up," she said, pressing her face to the window. "Do angels live up here?" Alexander, who had buried himself in data and deadlines, found himself chuckling, something he hadn't done in years. "Sometimes, maybe they do." As they talked, Sophie explained her story. Her mother worked 2 cleaning jobs in the building, and today she couldn't find anyone to watch Sophie. So, Sophie waited in the lobby for hours. But when she got bored, she remembered her mom once saying, "The man in the highest office has the biggest heart, he just forgot how to use it." And so, Sophie found her way up to the top floor. Alexander didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to emotions anymore. He had lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago and had since buried himself in work to escape the emptiness. He had no children, no family, just a legacy built on innovation and ambition, but no love. But something shifted that day. Sophie came again the next afternoon. And the day after that. What started as a spontaneous visit turned into a ritual. Alexander would clear his afternoons for an hour with Sophie. Sometimes they'd draw. Sometimes she'd ask him to tell her stories, real ones. And sometimes, they'd just sit quietly, watching the city buzz below. One day, Sophie brought him a homemade bracelet, made of cheap beads and plastic string. "It's a friendship bracelet," she said. "Now we're best friends." He wore it on his wrist. Not under the sleeve, not hidden, but proudly. The staff was shocked. Rumors spread like wildfire. And then the miracle happened. That very quarter, the company saw the highest spike in employee morale since its inception. Why? Because people noticed something different in the building. The CEO smiled now. He greeted employees. He asked how their families were. He approved flexible work hours. He started a childcare center in the building. Suddenly, Alexander wasn't just a CEO, he became a human being again. But Sophie's visits started to slow. 1 week passed, then 2. No Sophie. Worried, Alexander used his company's resources to find out where she lived. What he discovered broke him. Sophie's mother had collapsed from exhaustion. She was hospitalized, and child services had taken Sophie into temporary custody. Alexander didn't hesitate. He met with lawyers. He met with social workers. And then he did something no one expected. He applied to foster Sophie. He, a billionaire CEO, used to power lunches and boardroom negotiations, now found himself sitting through parenting classes, doing home inspections, and learning how to braid hair and read bedtime stories. When Sophie returned to live with him, she looked at him and said, "I told you you weren't a stranger." From that moment forward, Alexander didn't just build technology, he built a home. Years passed, and Sophie flourished. Alexander started a foundation in her name, focusing on helping working single mothers, building childcare centers in underprivileged areas, and sponsoring the education of thousands of children. At company town halls, he often opened with the story of how a knock on the door changed his life. He would say, "You never know who you're inspiring. Never forget to open the door, not just literally, but to your heart." Sophie's story became a legend in the corporate world, a tale that taught hardened executives to reconnect with their humanity. Eventually, Sophie stood on stage at her high school graduation, with Alexander in the front row, tears streaming down his face. She was the valedictorian. Her speech was simple, but unforgettable. When I was 4, I knocked on a door. I was just looking for a friend. But what I found was a father, a family, and a future. Never be afraid to knock on doors, because sometimes miracles answer. That moment, the entire auditorium stood in applause. The story went viral. News outlets picked it up. People from around the world sent letters to the company, thanking them, thanking Sophie, thanking Alexander. It reminded people that behind every corporation, every skyscraper, every title, there are people with broken hearts waiting to heal. It reminded us all that love doesn't always come wrapped in familiarity, it sometimes knocks on the door in the form of a child asking for friendship. And that maybe, just maybe, miracles don't fall from the sky. Maybe they walk up 40 flights of stairs, holding a stuffed bunny, with a question that melts away all the walls we build around ourselves. From that day on, a plaque hung on the CEO's door. It didn't read, "Office of the CEO." It simply read, "Welcome, friend,